Well, with us today, we have the Athletics Chelsea writer Simon Johnson and Jack Pitt-Brooke, who followed Pochettino's reign at Spurs very, very closely indeed. Let's start with you, Simon. Many people, including Chelsea fans, will have been surprised by the decision, considering the uptick in form, 5 wins to end the season, Europa League qualification. But what was your reaction?
I wasn't surprised, Adam, and in a way, I'm quite surprised people are surprised because from the man himself, Mauricio Pochettino, he dropped a number of hints for months, really, but particularly in the last 6 weeks about how he was feeling. He was starting to say some very outspoken things, having little digs at the organisation, stroke sporting directors. He had many opportunities to say that he was staying for sure, but would often say, it's not my decision, it's their decision. When I asked him quite recently after Todd Bowley's comments at the Sportico conference about how Todd seemed to be quite positive, and he'd also admitted early in the press conference about that he'd started work on pre-season. I asked him a very positive question. Is this a good sign that you're going to be staying? And he decided to go voluntarily down a completely different route of saying, well, it's not just about the club being happy. We have to be happy. And if there is a split, it is not the end of the world. I mean, this is extraordinary stuff. He then reined back on those comments over the weekend, perhaps because someone had a word in his ear. But a coach doesn't talk like this unless he is sort of thinking there's a possibility of parting. And then on top of that, I was starting to get indication, not just, I mean, we'd all known for a while the club were going to review things at the end of the season and that potentially there'd be a change. But I was also starting to hear things from Pochettino's side of things that he was, as he said in the press conference, not particularly happy. So yeah, so in answer to your question, Adam, I've kind of been waiting for this day to come, and it's sad in the sense that Chelsea did seem to be making upward progress, but at the same time, it was only just 7 weeks ago that Chelsea were just 2 points better off than the previous season at the same stage, and last season was a disaster. So if you actually look across the whole season, that's what Pochettino is being judged on. Can you really sort of say the last 7 weeks makes up for the whole season? And that's obviously one of the things that the owners were thinking about.
Obviously, the statement pointed to it being a mutual decision. I mean, you've mentioned it there that, yes, Maurizio himself was starting to think about whether this is a project that, even if there was an uptick, that he wanted to be part of. Just explain how you think the decision actually came about from both sides.
Yeah, so the actual sort of workings of it, that there was a meeting on Monday. They then sort of, as they're sort of trying to put out there, slept on it, and then they came to an actual decision on Tuesday. But really, in my opinion, I think the decision was pretty much made already. I think both sides knew what was going to happen. This was just sort of dotting the I's, crossing the T's. Let's come to an agreement, etc., and know for sure. Chelsea would probably deny that and sort of indicate no, this was only the time. This was the only time. But I do believe. I know often the word mutual consent is often sort of looked at with great cynicism, and understandably so. But I honestly believe that this is actually a mutual parting of the ways. And I think it suits both parties and this is why. On Pochettino's side, he now leaves as with his stock quite high, and there are some big jobs available right now. So there's a lot of sympathy in Pochettino's corner. Just imagine if he'd left, as I said earlier, sort of when they were 11th, 12th, just 2 points better off than last season, he'd be viewed a lot more critically. Now people going, well, actually, even Chelsea fans, many of whom weren't big fans of his, sort of going, oh, what have they done that for? And then from the club's point of view, one of the reasons why they've made this decision is because they view next season, if this makes sense, as a 2-season season because of the timing of the Club World Cup in June. So you've got this awkward situation of Pochettino had 1 year left with an option for another 12 months. Could you really afford to go into that tournament, which clearly Chelsea are taking very seriously, with that uncertainty of what's going on with the head coach? And part of the discussions would have been, do we stay married for two more years or not? And if the answer's no on both sides, then I think it's a pretty logical conclusion to sort of say, well, actually, let's shake hands, go our separate ways, and Chelsea are now looking for another coach, and Pochettino's looking for another job.
Jack, what's your take on it? Does it feel like the right thing for both parties?
Well, I'm not as close to the situation at Chelsea nearly as Simon. So my perspective on this is mainly on from watching Chelsea on television. But having watched a lot of Chelsea on television, I'm one of those people who thinks, isn't it amazing for the man to leave the job now when it's only just become clear that he has successfully turned the ship around. I think, like a lot of people, there was definitely a point, when they were booed off against Wolves in February, that I thought he's not going to be able to do this. He's not going to be able to imprint his personality and ideas on the football club. And yet, over the last few months, I think they've lost one league game since then, and admittedly that was a bad one at Arsenal, but generally the trajectory has been upwards. And I was thinking, they finally look like a Pochettino team. You can imagine a bright future for them if they can get the summer transfer window right. And so, from my outside perspective, I am one of those people who is surprised, because I think you're kind of sacrificing any prospect of a bright future under Pochettino to start again with a less experienced manager.
Simon, you've heard that. I suppose you sort of alluded to it earlier on. Is that a valid opinion? That this was, yes, okay, a short period of time, but it was a body of work to say that some progress had been made at the right time, or just in time, if you wanted to qualify for Europe.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at some of their data, even when they were struggling, it wasn't a reflection of games. There were many results that went against Chelsea early on in the season, but actually they played better than the results indicated. They just left themselves too much ground to make up in terms of qualifying for the Champions League. And I think this is another strong message that's being sent out there, that Europa League, if it is Europa League, of course, they could drop down the Conference League if Manchester United win the FA Cup final, isn't good enough. So good luck to the next guy. You know what the benchmark is. I was also told quite early on, ahead of the League Cup final, that winning the League Cup final wouldn't be enough. It was going to be judged on the league position, and I do think, despite what I've alluded to in terms of 2 points better off than last season, I do think overall there's reasons to be positive of the progress they were making. And perhaps most tellingly of all, the players are very much generally on his side. You can only go by the stream of images and posts on social media. Now, this is fairly commonplace. Obviously, whenever a manager is sacked, the players want to be seen to be, oh, I'm so sad to see you go, because they don't want to be seen as the reverse, as sort of like some kind of traitor in the mix or whatever. But I do honestly think it's genuine. And someone I spoke to referred to it as one of the senior players, and of course there aren't many of those, said that he's the best man manager he's ever worked under. I mean, and when I heard that, I went, wow, that is some statement. So I do think he was popular, and therefore it is a big call to make yet another change. I also sort of think it sends out quite a message, given the new owners came in, having taken over and said, we will be different to Roman Abramovich. We will be about the process and the project and patience. Well, here we are 2 years later, and some of these players have effectively about to play under a sixth different manager in the dugout, if you count Bruno Solter's glorious one-game tenure against Liverpool last season. But still, if you talk permanent managers, that's Tuchel that's gone, that's Potter that's gone, and now Pochettino that's gone. So it's a fourth permanent head coach they're looking for in 2 years, and you sort of think this is not the patience and the project that that they came in talking about. And of course, one of the things different from the Abramovich era and his hiring and firing record was that it would often lead to trophies. Well, Chelsea don't have any trophies either, so it is a remarkable turn of events. But I go back to what I said at the start; it's not a surprising one.
Jack, do you think that this has been a restorative year for Pochettino, or do you think it has been damaging if you look at the majority of the campaign and some of the perception of how Chelsea were playing?
Well, I think it's been a restorative campaign to his image because of the last few months. I mean, the fact is, people in football have got pretty short memories, and they tend to look at whatever happened most recently. And if you'd been judging on the first half of the season, then it really would have supported that narrative that he's chosen another bad club to go to, like PSG. He's struggling with the kind of politics and the demands of elite club football, just like he did again, just like at PSG. Maybe he is better suited to an aspirational club rather than a kind of established club. But given that the last few months have gone so well and they finished sixth, 3 points behind Tottenham, much better than they did last season, 19 points better than last season, I think that now the conclusion that people will draw from watching this is Pochettino's proved himself again. He's actually proved that he can instill his ideas and his ethos and his personality, even in a dysfunctional environment. He can get a kind of, you know, let's just say, a hastily put together squad. He can impose his football on them. He can get them playing the Pochettino way. He can get them fit. He can get them to press, and so on. So I really think people will draw their conclusions from the second half of the season, and and amongst those people will also be clubs who are looking for a new manager.
Simon, just before we go on to who's going to be next, and we'll also discuss, potentially what's next for Pochettino as well. Jack used the phrase there, a dysfunctional environment. Just take us into the decision-making process. Who's making these calls, or who's having the biggest influence on these key decisions at the moment?
Well, Chelsea will always insist, as perhaps you wouldn't be surprised, that it's been a collaborative process, and they will definitely point to the co-sporting directors, Paul Winstanley and Lawrence Stewart, two hires of who joined early last year, as leading the process, leading the review, and from what I'm led to believe, the review had actually started last week, sort of examining all kinds of things. But of course, these things have to be signed off by the co-owners. Now, Pochettino met with Todd Boehly for dinner last Friday, and he dropped that little nugget in his final post-match press conference on Sunday. And then Boehly flew home. Now, apparently that's for a personal reason. It wasn't, seen as some kind of division in camp. Although Boehly's comments have been sort of kind of contradict what's just happened. He's spoken sort of quite glowingly about Pochettino and stressed the need for patience. Although it's since been described to me as he was referring that to the signings and not to the managerial situation. And then, look, it should not be underestimated that Clearlake, who actually own the majority of Chelsea, their representatives on the board in Badad Eghbali and Jose Feliciano, they're the ones that you see more often than not at the games. So I don't think it should be. I'm quite surprised that you always see Todd Boehly's face whenever Chelsea make a decision or make a signing. I don't think their influence, as in Eghbali and Feliciano, should be underestimated. They definitely have a key voice in everything that goes on.
Well, let's discuss now who potentially is going to replace Mauricio Pochettino. And Simon, you wrote an article on The Athletic this morning reporting that the club hope to make an appointment within a matter of days rather than weeks. We'll see if that transpires, because some things can unpredictable can happen in these sort of processes. Some of the names that have been mentioned, will you take us through them? Who's in the mix?
So it ranges from Brentford's Thomas Frank. You've got Kieran McKenna, of course, whose work at Ipswich is highly admired in the game. It's not been totally ruled out that De Zerbi might be in the frame, although he's very much sort of on the outskirts, I think, as things stand. There's Sebastian Hoeneß at Stuttgart for the job that he's done in the Bundesliga. And there's a few others, but I don't think you guys should underestimate that, like at any club, it's all about it's not as if they've made this decision without drawing up a short list in advance. That's not to say that they've approached people directly before they've made the call, but every club has like a succession plan in place. And I think Chelsea have been certainly sort of considering, knowing that this review was coming up, what would happen if the decision was made to part ways. And yes, it's going to be days rather than weeks. And that makes a lot of sense because the players want to know, new signings want to know sort of who they're going to be playing for, and to end that uncertainty. What I would say about who they appoint next is it's not going to be one of these. They're not going to be reunited with an ex, a very outspoken ex, like a Jose Mourinho, a Thomas Tuchel, an Antonio Conte. What they want is someone who will fit and is prepared to accept the structure that the club have been building over the last few years. So very much a head coach, and that's pretty much it. You accept, if you're going to appoint a set piece coach, you accept that you're going to be working with that set piece coach, that the signings are kind of going to be made whilst with a little nod to your direction, but the signings going to be made for you and you've got to make them work. So whoever comes in has got to accept that that's the limit of their role, that they're not going to have this sort of Sir Alex Ferguson or Jurgen Klopp type position where you get to call the shots. It's very much you're just one cog in a very sort of big enterprise operating machine.
Jack, when you hear that brief and what might await the next incumbent, how does it make you feel? Does it fill you with, oh yeah, I think they've cracked it. I think they're gonna now go on a sort of a dynasty role with the perfect guy?
Well, look, I think the first thing to say is people will want to manage Chelsea, or the people want to head coach Chelsea, if that's a verb. You know, they will want the money, the glamour, the prestige, European football, Stamford Bridge, etc., etc. That all said, I've got a few issues with it. The first issue is that if you want to be successful in English football, there is absolutely no substitute for what I call the powerful manager model. You know, and this is not just talking about Wenger, Ferguson, the glory days. It's Guardiola, Klopp, even Arteta now. Like, if you want to sustain success, you need a manager who doesn't do everything, but who does set the tone for the whole building, and who everyone buys into their ideas. And I don't think there's any evidence on the last few years that you can get players to run that extra mile for a here today, gone tomorrow disposable head coach. However, Chelsea are clearly going to go about it their own way, and you know that's entirely they own the club, not me, so it's entirely up to them what they do with it. The second point to make is that lots and lots of clubs have looked around Europe this summer trying to find a manager and have failed to do so. They've gone into the marketplace and they found the shelves completely blank. You know, look at Bayern Munich. They decided they were going to let Thomas Tuchel go. They failed to get Nagelsmann. They failed to get Rangnick. They failed to get Xabi Alonso. They tried to keep Thomas Tuchel, failed to do that. And they're now talking to Vincent Kompany, who's a very promising young coach, but Burnley got 23 points last year. Look at Barcelona. Like, they agreed to let Xavi go. They had a look at who they might get. I think they looked at Rafa Marquez, the former Mexican defender. Now they're kind of sticking with Xavi, but they're kind of maybe not so sure. So Man United haven't decided what to do with Eric Ten Hag. The marketplace seems pretty bare, and so it's not like, and I know Simon mentioned those names earlier, and I'm sure they're all really good, but they're not as experienced as Pochettino, are they? Like, none of those guys have got a CV comparable to Pochettino, and Pochettino is a manager who's accused of not having a good enough CV by some people, and yet, so I think all I can say is I think it's a very bold strategy from Chelsea. I think it's a very novel strategy. Maybe they know something that the rest of the football world doesn't know, and maybe they're about to land on some brilliant combination that actually manages to overperform and get the most out of their playing squad. But if I was, I mean, I'm not a Chelsea fan, but if I was a Chelsea fan, I think they're probably safer off with Pochettino.
Yeah, on that point, Simon, one of the accusations of Graham Potter, for example, was that perhaps he wasn't wily enough. He might not have had broad enough shoulders to deal with a job of that stature. So that's what led to Pochettino coming in. Of the names that have been mentioned that we have talked about, the likes of Kieran McKenna, maybe Enzo Maresca, two newly promoted Premier League managers, some of the other contenders. Do they strike you as being able to not only deal with the stature of the club, but also the complexities of dealing with a very, there's a hierarchy there that are beady-eyed and watching every move that you're making?
I've always said that Chelsea is one of the toughest jobs in football. That's probably not exactly a groundbreaking statement to make, but you could argue it's even tougher now. I mean, at least in the Abramovich era, you had winners in that dressing room. So you knew, even if your stay was short, that you had a great chance of winning silverware before you left. This is a totally different Chelsea where they're trying to build these guys into winners, but the coach keeps changing. So you've got to make a very quick impact under sort of quite difficult circumstances. Plus, you've got a fan base that is ready to revolt. It is on the borderline here. Now, Pochettino, I wouldn't say there was a great affection for him because of his Tottenham connection, but it's quite telling that the reaction since his departure has been, on the whole, one of disappointment, because there were signs that perhaps things were turning around. And also, perhaps there's a bit of fatigue about the amount of change that's happened at this club over the last 2 years, which has been absolutely extraordinary. Can someone come in and wave this magic wand where you have to be not only getting the players on side, but everyone behind the scenes on side? You have to get the team playing entertaining football. You've got to get the team to qualify for the Champions League. I mean, it's a tough one, but at the same time, I think it's Jack in third. It's also an exciting challenge because perhaps if you look at that squad, you can see that it's one that's on the up. You can see the development in a Nicholas Jackson. Caicedo, yes, he cost a lot of money. It took him a while to get going, but he's looking really good. I could go on. There is Cole Palmer. I mean, who wouldn't want to work with Cole Palmer after the season he's just had? So there is a lot of grounds for optimism, but my concern is, what do the club do if in March they're sitting in 11th? They're way off Champions League. They basically sent the signal out there that they'll get rid, they'll make another change. They've now made a rod for their own backs. So no matter what the coach says next season about time, patience, etc., we're all going to be thinking, well, you're on borrowed time.
And one of the subplots, Simon, in terms of the squad, and also linked with Pochettino's position, was that there may well be a need this summer, as there has been over the last 12 months due to PSR constraints, to sell one of the homegrown talents, the likes of Conor Gallagher, maybe Trevor Chalobah. But then Gallagher goes and establishes himself as a key cog in Pochettino's wheel. He's now gone, the manager. Does that maybe make you think that they are going to tell the new guy, unfortunately, you're going to have to do this without Gallagher or without Chalobah? What's your prediction for how the squad is going to churn this summer?
I don't think the new coach will have an enormous say on who's sold. I think, as has been shown, that Chelsea have tried to sell Conor Gallagher a few windows now, or certainly been open to selling him. And that was the case with Pochettino wanting to keep him. So, I'll be quite surprised pleasantly surprised if Gallagher ends up staying, because this is kind of a repeat of the Mason Mount scenario of 12 months ago. A guy that's down to the last year in his contract can obviously count as pure profit if sold, and he'll certainly attract a lot of interested clubs because of the season he's just had. He was the only Chelsea player to make over 50 appearances this season, and he's certainly come on strong, England international as well. But it would also be quite a good PR strategy move by the club to somehow come up with an agreement at the 11th hour, which I wouldn't rule out entirely, because Gallagher would obviously, given the chance, would definitely choose to stay at Stamford Bridge.
Final question to you, Jack, and that's not on what Chelsea are going to do next or this summer, but what Pochettino may want to do now, because there are, as we've discussed earlier, plenty of jobs up for grabs. Where do you think he would fit in best?
Well, what we don't know at this point is whether he wants to go straight back into work. He took just over a year out after leaving Tottenham before going to PSG, took almost a year out between leaving PSG and signing up for Chelsea. So it might be that after a tiring season, he wants time out. If he wants to work, then, like I said, there's a lot of clubs out there who are looking for managers at the moment and who have not been able to identify candidates better than Pochettino. To me, the obvious one would be Manchester United. We still don't know what they're going to do with Eric Ten Hag. You know, Pochettino has been linked with Man United for years, like ever since that famous lunch with Sir Alex Ferguson 8 years ago. He's been constantly linked with United. It's never quite worked out for various reasons. You know, Pochettino was a bit too. Pochettino wanted to stay loyal to Tottenham after they sacked Van Gaal and Mourinho. After they sacked Solskjaer, I think United were a bit reluctant to get involved in a tussle with PSG. Then obviously in 2022, they went for Ten Hag over Pochettino. I think in hindsight, I think that Pochettino would have probably done a better job over the last 2 years. I think he'd be a good fit there. I mean, I don't really know what exactly the kind of Sir Jim, Brailsford, Ashworth, Barada, Wilcox leadership group, if I haven't missed anyone out, what exactly they would want from a head coach. But, you know, you can see Pochettino would tick a lot of boxes. He's worked in the Premier League. He's had great success at Tottenham, young players, style of play, all that kind of stuff. So I think, to me, from the outside, that would make sense. But if it's not there, I'm sure there would be someone else, you know. Whether that's following Carlo Ancelotti at Real Madrid, which is a job that he's been linked with many times in the past, maybe Barcelona, maybe a big job in Italy, where there's been interest in him before, but it's never really got that close. So, yeah, look, ultimately, it's a good time to be an out-of-work manager. It feels like there's not that many of them around anymore. So I don't think any out-of-work manager is going to have too long before their phone starts ringing.
Jack, brilliant. Thank you very much, as always, and to you, Simon, as well. Don't forget, there'll be continued coverage of this story and all the build-up to the Euros, the Copa America, and the transfer window as well on The Athletic. Thanks very much for listening. Don't forget to rate and follow the podcast.
If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.